Hello, everyone. A very warm good morning to all of you, and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we take a look at the international edition of today's The Hindu newspaper, analyze the important articles relevant for your prelims as well as for your mains perspective. Also, we take a look at the perspective of answer writing, that how can you create answers and what kind of questions can be expected out of this in the mains examination. After taking a look at the analysis, I suggest to you to also practice the MCQs which can be framed from these particular kind of questions and these particular kind of topics. For that, you can visit our Telegram group, and thereby at the Unacademy IES English Telegram group and the channel, you will get those MCQs as well, which you can take a look into. Now, the PDF of the session will be available shortly after the session, which you can download. Now, these are the topics that we are going to have a discussion for today. In total, around 10 different topics. Now, the discussion for each one of them will be to a varying degree. Now, the first article that we are going to discuss very briefly is the government Kuki-Zo groups discuss the SOO pact. Now, this is a simple continuation of what we had discussed on 8th of this particular month, 8th of June 2025. Now, for those of you who are interested in knowing the background of the Kuki-Zo group, the Zomies, and the SOO Pact and how that is a tripartite agreement, why it was arrived, I would suggest to you to take a look at the Sunday's newspaper analysis, which was conducted on 8th. You will get a detailed background. Here, we shall simply be carrying upon from that particular discussion about what are the newer parameters which have emerged in that discussion. This is relevant for your GS paper 3. Now, again, one of the continuing discussions which we had from yesterday is about census. So, in today's editorial piece, you have an article about the census and the remaking of the people. Now, what is that about? And what are the implications of the census exercise to be conducted on 1st of March 2027? Why that is a kind of a landmark event. Now, empowering women in agriculture in food security. This article explores the role of women when it comes to food security, or rather, the larger area of agriculture, and how oftentimes they are at a disadvantageous position owing to certain amount of incapacities that the system puts on them. So, this is very important for your examination in the mains. Very, very important topic for which I would suggest that you should have your own short notes when it comes to women in agriculture. Now, how drones are the new face of warfare. Now, Operation Sindoor on one end and also Operation Spider by Ukraine against Russia have indicated that drone warfare has come of age. Now, how that has changed the face of modern warfare, that is something we will take a look into. What is it that India needs to do? And also, we shall also use this opportunity to understand that what is it, the mechanisms that India did deploy in order to shave off the drone attacks which happened in the nights of 8th, 9th, and 10th of May. Now, California to sue Trump for illegal, immoral National Guards deployment. Now, this is not a direct question which can be asked from here, but you generally have questions associated with the immigration policy of the developed countries in order to understand the perspective of their demographic winter. So, in this particular article, we are going to explore what is happening actually in the region of California and what are those riots which are unfolding in California. So, a very brief timeline for your overall understanding is something that we will discuss here, so that going ahead into the future from tomorrow onwards, you can follow this news story much more closely. This is a developing news story across the globe, and the world has eyes upon this story. Now, certain articles relevant for your prelims, a new water harvesting model which has been developed and which is being implemented in the region of Rajasthan, India's first e waste recycling park to come up in Delhi. Now, Asafoetida or hing, that is being grown in India after a long period, or rather for the first time. So, what are the conditions required for the growth of Asafoetida? Which are the typical regions where you will find them to be growing, and what are the various areas where they are being grown? Now, how extracting nickel can be made more sustainable. Now, this is an article which talks about the extraction of nickel from the ore being very carbon intensive. Carbon intensive means it will emit a lot of carbon and carbon emissions, creating greenhouse gas concentration, creating a kind of warming effect. So, how nickel extraction can be modified rather than being carbon intensive to make them eco friendly. With the help of this, we shall also be taking a brief look at the larger producers of nickel and the overall producers of cobalt as well, because oftentimes nickel and cobalt occur together in the ore format. So, the largest producers of nickel and cobalt across the world. Now, government eases SEZ norms for chip and electronic part manufacturing, which is happening across the country in order to provide a boost and bolster these other industries. So these are the 10 topics that we are going to have a discussion and hold a discussion for today. Now, in case you want to have a preparation to the tune of as it is required by civil services standards, the importance and the requirement of that is to get your basic concepts very, very clear. Time and time again, the prelims paper and the mains paper have indicated that simply muggification and ratification of the facts lead you to no place. It is the conceptual clarity in the subjects like geography, economy, polity, etc., which yield success year after another. Now, this tells you the importance of cementing your basic concepts. In order to help you do that, we have come up with a lucrative offer for a foundation batch of GS, whereby you can avail the top notch quality lectures from the top educators. You can watch the recorded lectures as well. Complete coverage of GS plus CSAT, access to all batches and courses, different courses, quality enrichment programs, etc., which are there, the UCAN sessions. So you will get access to some of the courses as well, one on one mentorship, dedicated doubt solving, mains test series with evaluation. So, in a way, preparing you completely to ace the examination, be it 2026 or 27. Now, you can use the code IES English and avail greater amount of discount. Start the preparation as early as possible. Having said that, we come to the first article of the day. And the first article of the day is a simple follow up of the detailed discussion that we have had on 8th of June, this particular week. Now, again, I would reiterate, in case we want to know about the backdrop, the background of the Kuki-Zo community, etc., please take a look at that discussion which was held on Sunday. Now, what is this article about? Government Kuki-Zo groups discuss the SOO rules. Will meet again next week. Now, what are these SOO rules? SOO rules, basically, as we had discussed, this is suspension of operation. Now, what we had discussed that day as well, suspension of operations. This is a tripartite agreement. That is, tripartite means what? Arrived after a consensus of three parties, right? So, tripartite agreement. Now, this is between which particular agencies? You have the central government, you basically have the state government, then you also have the Kuki group, the militant groups which are there, the armed groups which are there. So more than 25 Kuki-Zo groups, the Zomis groups, etc. So that is where you have the tripartite agreement. Right? Now, here, this agreement was arrived at way back in 2008. Now, since that point of time, this agreement has been renewed annually. There is an annual renewal of this agreement. That has not been done since initial part of last year, that is 2024, owing to the fact that the state government of Manipur that got and it had the impression and the reportage that some of the Kuki groups they have moved away from their designated camps and they have basically started setting up camps near the valley where you have Maiti population. That has not only increased the insecurities amongst the Maitis, but they have also allowed some of these groups to launch attacks against the Maiti civilians. Also, they have managed to blockade the national highway in the region. So you have two important national highways. You don't need to learn the national highways out there. So you have NH2 and NH37. NH2 and 37. Now, this National Highway 2 and 37, they are very vital for providing connectivity to the valley region of Imphal, all the way to the region of Assam and Arunachal and the other areas beyond. So, this becomes a vital artery to supply important commodities, life saving drugs, and so on. And by blocking this, they are able to provide a kind of a chokehold into the entire region of the valley. So, owing to this fact, and owing to the fact that many of the Kuki groups had basically uh, disarmed the police force, robbed large amount of armaments, and looted the safe or the arms that they themselves have kept into the safes as per the SO agreement. So, thereby the state government it reneged from this particular agreement. Now, as a consequence, there was a complete breakdown of confidence and complete breakdown of talks in between the government forces and the Kuki. Now, they have again come back to the table. Now, when they come back to the table, it is not as if immediately another agreement will be signed or will be penned. Now, both the sides, that is the government as well as the Kuki groups, have their own demands that they see as an important milestone which requires to be fulfilled before renegotiation of this SO pact can be done again. Now, that is the case of the present situation. What are those demands? We will talk about. But for those who are still uninitiated about the Kuki-Zo and the tripartite agreement, let me give you some amount of important background here. So, SOO Pact, tripartite agreement signed between the center, Manipur government, and the 25 Kuki militant groups operating in the northeastern state of Manipur and Nagaland. Primary objective of initiating a peace dialogue. Because for a long period of time, the Kukis had been up in arms against the government. And the Kukis had always demanded a separate Kuki homeland. That Kuki homeland would comprise almost many parts of the northeastern states, barring Arunachal Pradesh, because in Arunachal Pradesh, you don't have a sizable Kuki population. And that Kuki homeland would also encompass some areas where you have the Chin population in Myanmar. So that also comprises the Zomis. So that is where the Kuki-Zomi, that grouping comes into existence. Their perpetual and perennial conflict with the Nagas is also a point of concern which has led to violent upsurge previously in the region of Nagaland and some parts of the bordering area of Manipur as well. Now, due to that outbreak of violence and that cycle of violence continuing for a long period of time, that is when the government agencies succeeded in bringing these Kuki groups to the table of negotiation and conversation. And they talked about the fact that in case we want to fulfill the demand, in case we want to further the negotiation, first thing that needs to be done is cessation of any operation. Neither we will attack you nor should you attack us. So that is where the SOO pact germinates or gets created and gets born. Now, out of this SOO pact, the simple suspension of operation, that is the entire meaning of this. So, this suspension of operation meant Kuki militant groups agreed to stop carrying out violent activities and the Indian government will halt its operation against the Kuki militant. Suspension of operations. Now, this SOO pact had certain conditionalities also which were put into place in order to put an end to the violence and the cycle of violence which perpetuated in the region of the northeastern area and the state of Manipur. Now, amongst the various conditionalities which were put out, one of the major conditionalities, if you will see, that first of all, every year, based upon the progress of implementation, you have the renewal of SOO Pact. Then you will also find one particular factor here that earlier the demand of the Kuki groups and the Kuki-Zo groups would be the creation and carving out a separate Kuki homeland in the northeastern states. Now, the government put its foot down and said that this is something which is never going to happen. So, whatever conversation or negotiation that you want to have, please do have it under the flag and under the ambit of the Constitution of India itself. So that is where it requires these groups to abide by the Constitution of India and the laws of the land of the and territorial integrity of Manipur has to be respected. One other important part of it was basically that these particular 25 cookie groups who signed the agreement, now they agreed to live in certain designated camps where they can be monitored. And these camps numbered around 7. Now, they also had to surrender the weapons that they had to be kept in certain safes, right? In the custody of the armed forces. And basically, they were allowed to keep some minimal amount of weapons in order to guard themselves and their leaders. That was also one of the conditionalities. Other than that, they would also be given a monthly stipend of somewhere close to rupees 6,000. Now, ever since the spate of violence broke out in Manipur from 6th of May 2023, since that point of time, many of these terms have been blatantly and openly violated. From the calls of again carving out a separate Kuki homeland to the expansion of these camps from 7 to 14, mostly around the valley region of or the valley region which is inhabited by the Maitis, that has signaled some amount of difficulty in between the or when it comes to understanding between the government of Manipur and the Kuki group. At the same time, you also have that this particular agreement has not been renewed, the stipend has not been paid. And when this pact also talked about the case where no extortion based activities could be carried out by the militants anymore, the militants have resorted to that old phase of extortion again by choking the national highways 2 and 37. They are able to create a kind of a ransom like situation that fulfill our demands. Otherwise, you will not have the supply of essential commodities into the valley, and the valley will be desperate. So that is where the breakdown of confidence has happened. Now, suspension of the pact, this has happened from the side of the state of Manipur, and the Kuki groups have also reneged from their earlier agreed position. Now, once they have come back to the negotiating table again, what are the developments? Now, one phase of talks have been held. Next phase of talks will be held next week. As a student, as a candidate for civil services, what is advisable is just keep on following these developments. If you are regular in following these developments, you will not need to ratify at the end of the day from a monthly magazine or from a monthly report out there. Just follow these developments. You know the background of the Kuki homeland, the demand, the Kuki-Zo community. You know the background about the SO Pact, why it has been disturbed. And just if you follow the new developments periodically, you will be abreast with all the requirement of content for your examination, even for your interview purpose. So, what is the new development? So, you see, when it comes to the side of the government, they had their grievance that look, you have violated the agreement, you have increased the number of camps, and you have basically held many people to ransom, and you have brought about a spate of violence. That was the grievance from the side of the government. When it came to the cookies basically had a grievance against the government that you are basically taking us for granted. And what we required was a kind of some autonomous council, etc., which was not provided in the face of this tripartite agreement. All our demands of some autonomy which was required, that was put in abeyance. So cookie groups, they also have a particular grievance. So now, when they met on the negotiating table, both sides put forward their grievance, and they put forward that these conditionalities need to be fulfilled in order for these talks to progress. Now, what was the demand from the side of the government? The government demanded free movement across the national highways, movement across national highways, cessation of violence, that violent activities should come to an end. Also, reduction of camps from 14 to the earlier designated 7. Okay. Whereas The cookies. Now, cookies said that when it comes to reduction of camp or free movement across the national highways, they will have to go back to their constituency, ask the people about their opinion, that is the cookie population, and then be able to commit whether they are going to promise this or whether they cannot fulfill these demands. But this is where the government has taken a hard stance that this has to be fulfilled. The basic criteria needs to be fulfilled. Cookies, on the other hand, have their own set of demands. They want the creation of a union territory with legislature for their own representation. And they want this particular cookie dominated region of Manipur to be carved out into a separate union territory. And they feel that this is the demand which needs to be fulfilled for any talks to move forward. Now, creation of a union territory, a separate union territory within a small state of Manipur, that is again something which mostly the government will not allow. But nonetheless, these are the hard stances which have been held. Always understand that at the negotiating table, at the bargaining table, you don't go with the realistic approach initially. You go with a hard stance, and then both the sides they come across, and then a negotiation or an agreement is reached. So we have to wait and hold our breath till next week when again they will meet, take a look into how these talks have progressed. So as of now, these are the new demands which have been put across the table both by the government as well as the side of the cookies. Okay? Now, tripartite means an agreement between three parties. That is where the word tripartite, or that is what the word tripartite indicates. Tripartite is not a term only used for SOO pact. If let's suppose tomorrow India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh agree on a treaty, it will be a tripartite agreement because three parties are involved. Okay, so understand the meaning of the term. It is not something peculiar to SOO pact. Camp reduction, the camps where they are living. The cookies, as of now, the militant group of the cookies where they are supposed to live. Okay, I hope that is understood. Now, then coming on to the next article, which is again a follow up on the discussion that we had yesterday, the census and the remaking of a people. Now, this talks about the fact that when we talk about census, what is census? Synchronized counting of population of a particular region. Now, we humans, we make up a population. Just like any other species, you have the population of tigers, you have population of lions, etc. But when you have to provide some identity to that population, when you have to understand the demography of the population, for that, the census exercise comes into existence. Yesterday, we had seen that census exercise in India, in a synchronized manner, that is, at one go, being carried across the country, was initiated way back in 1881. Since that point of time, it has been carried out every 10 years. But there was a break in to 2021 owing to the COVID pandemic. Then you had the exigencies of the general election and also certain political compulsions which cannot be ignored, due to which the census exercise has been rescheduled to 2027. So that is the case of the census exercise. Now, yesterday I had asked you guys a question that in which particular decade did Indian population experience a decline in this census exercise? Because it is carried out every year. Every decade, India has witnessed a rise in population. But there was a decade between 1911, many of you managed to give the correct answer, to 1921, where India experienced a decline in population, and that was the only aberration. Now, today, your task is to tell me in the comment section about the reasons, three major reasons why India did experience a decline in this particular decade. Think about it, three particular reasons that you have to concentrate upon. Now, this census exercise which is carried out does not only give you the proportion or the population of people living in, let's suppose, a state of Bihar or a state of West Bengal or a state of Tamil Nadu. This also gives you an idea about the level of prosperity that the population has reached, the demographic quality of your population when it comes to literacy rate, when it comes to sex ratio, etc. Because when we talk about policy making, policy formulation, why does a government or an administration frame policies? The basic reason for framing policy is to bring about change in the lives of people. Now, unless and until you do know what are the problems that people face, your policies will largely be inaccurate, ineffective, and most dangerous of them all, misdirected. It will direct someone else when it has to direct someone else. So, in order to understand the reality of the population, periodic census exercise is a must. However, this year's census exercise is creating, or this time's census exercise is creating a lot of splash, owing to the implications which can arise out of this. There are certain political reasons out of that also arising out of it, political debates arising out of it as well, and certain curiosities. For example, when we talk about urban centers in India, all of us, you would have read about the fact that in India, 35% of our population is urban, 65% of our population is rural. Now, that is mostly as per the estimate of the previous census and mostly as per the estimate of some of the research books and the research publications of the World Bank. This has not been updated for more than a decade. So, in all probability, since 2011, the amount of rural to urban migration has been massive. Now, in the face of this massive rural to urban migration, this composition would have changed and could have changed dramatically. Rural urban migration. Not only that, you also have had, or we all have witnessed, not only rural to urban migration, but regional migration as well, where, barring the region of New Delhi, almost the entirety of the portion of northern and eastern India have been the regions of emigration or out migration. And regions of the west and the regions of the south have experienced immigration. So that would also have changed the population dynamics of various different regions. So that changing dynamics from a regional perspective can also be understood. Regional perspective can also be understood if we understand the population or the census. For that also, a detailed idea and an updated census is required. Other than that, we also have this particular year as the date when we will have the 16th Finance Commission. The 16th Finance Commission is expected to submit its report in this particular year. Now, 16th Finance Commission will talk about, or the suggestions that it will provide will delve upon the distribution of funds between the center and the state. Now, population is a criteria for that disbursement of the funds. That has created a lot of reservation amongst the southern states in particular, who have managed to put a cap on their population growth rate, control their population by health interventions. Now, they have a kind of a reservation, and rightfully so, that will our share in the central pool of funds decline owing to the fact that we have managed our population? Is that the case? But at the same time, so again, this will be driven by the population dynamic. But at the same time, one of the largest elephants in the room, so to say, or dinosaur in the room that everyone sees and is still addressing is basically the aspect of delimitation. Delimitation is to be kickstarted from the first census following 2026. Now, that has put various different states on the edge. States in the southern part of the country, they have a fear that their number of seats would reduce as the population in their states is reducing. So their representation when it comes to parliament will be put at risk. Whereas the populous states in the north, for example, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Bengal, etc., they might see the number of seats to be increased. So that has created a kind of a regional disparity aided by some amount of regional insecurity, which is never healthy for national integration and national development. So these are some of the typical areas where the census is important. Also, For the first time after independence, you will have the enumeration of the caste. Now, SCs and STs were already counted and demarcated as per the census exercise which were carried out. But other castes will also be enumerated. As a consequence of this, we will have now a data set whereby we can also create an atmosphere or an environment of affirmative action against the other backward classes as well, wherever required. But this again is a Pandora's box, to say the least. Because once you will have that caste census, then what next follows is the demand for increase in reservation. And that is again something which will capture our political landscape in all fairness and in all probability for the next decade. That is to increase the amount or the cap or the limit to reservation. Why should it be limited to 50% itself? So these are some of the political outcomes. At the same time, yesterday we had discussed that this census exercise, which will be carried out post 2026, will also be the census exercise on the basis of which the reservation of women, the bill for which was passed recently and previously by the parliament, now that women's reservation will come into implementation. So that is why this census again becomes important, right? And also, yes, this is the first census exercise to be carried out on a digital medium. But again, that will fasten the process. And that is something which has been on the cards for the past 2 to 3 years now. So everyone is aware that this will be a kind of a digital exercise, which is an expected norm going ahead into the third and the fourth decade of the 21st century. Now, the importance of census. So all the discussion that we have had, that is about what is written in the article, conceptualization and articulation of these in point-wise manner. Let us go through. So importance of census, it captures data on population across caste, religion, literacy, migration, economic activities, etc. For example, when we talk about urban planning, there also you need to know how many urban centers are there. Now, in urban centers, what defines an urban center? In India, when we talk about what is an urban center, you have a clear cut definition. Population density of the region should be greater than 400 people per square kilometer. The number of people in a particular area living should be greater than 5,000. And also, around 75% of the population in that region should be employed in secondary and tertiary activities. Right. Under these conditions, a region is generally treated as an urban center. Now, as per our last census, which was held, that is 2011, the number of urban centers in India was close to approximately 7,900. The present census, it is expected that these number of urban centers would have easily crossed the figure of 10,000 now. So when you have more than 10,000 urban centers, that puts an immediate need for urban governance. And that is largely being ignored in our country for a long period of time. UPSC has been asking questions regarding governance of urban issues for, again, owing to the financial devolution of funds, etc. So that has been an area of interest for UPSC as well for some time. So it helps transform a population into a people. Determining population is, what is this population into a people? Population is something which is very, in a way, think about it, population of other species are also there. Population of mosquitoes, population of tigers, population of lions. But people consider to have value. People consider to have a demand. People consider to have a kind of a moral ethical compass, a path to progress, a demand for governance, a requirement for justice. That is where population, to be transitioned into people, you need to know the details of the population. And that is why census becomes important. So, determining political representation, resource distribution, and even socioeconomic planning. So, all these examples that we have cited, that should be written if a question in the mains examination is asked. Now, implications of 2027 census, one of the major implications staring all of us in the face is delimitation, because if delimitation is carried out purely on the basis of population, then the parliamentary constituencies will experience a major shake-up, with some of the developed states like Tamil Nadu expected to suffer the worst. Now, despite the fact that the government, central government, on various occasions has provided a kind of a promise that that is not going to happen, but still, the trust levels in our political system are not at a higher position. The trust levels are at an all-time low. So, unless and until the real delimitation does happen, if it happens, till that point of time, everybody is keeping their fingers crossed. But having said that, there is a real fear that if this delimitation is carried out purely on the basis of population numbers, then 2029 election will be a completely different ball game altogether, where states like Tamil Nadu are expected to lose certain seats, whereas the states like Bihar, states like Uttar Pradesh are expected to gain massively in terms of seat distribution. So that can alter or change the political dynamics being observed across the country. So that is the case why delimitation will be in discussion from now all the way till 2027 and even beyond that, unless and until that aspect of delimitation comes into place. Now, Article 82 mandates the redrawing of seats happens based on the first census after 2026. So, this is the constitutional mandate. Now, obviously, after 2026, if the census had not been delayed, the next census would have been held in 2031. But the next census now being held in 2027, that further raises the eyebrows out there. Now, other than that, the concerns with delimitation, if it is carried out on pure population basis, is simple. That political representation and the value of the political voice in different regions of the country, that will change and that will shift from regions with high growth and educated areas to regions of low growth and high population. So that will be a kind of skewing of the political representation and political voice, which is not very desirable in the long term benefit. Because in this particular case, you are incentivizing poor fertility rates, you are incentivizing the condition of the lack of social reforms, etc. So, states with faster population growth and lower economic development could gain seats. Conversely, southern and western states with lower fertility rates but stronger economies could lose. Political power may shift from states with better managed growth to the higher population growth. Now, obviously, there are various different formulas being postulated that rather than simply going for numerical representation, we should go for the value of vote that is being considered. Now, this is as and when this discussion comes up, it incites the sentiments from across the board, from various different sides of the political spectrum, that this is correct, no, this is correct, we will be disadvantaged, no, you will be disadvantaged, and so on and so forth. The bickering goes on, and that is something for all of you to see as well. Now, there are various discussions where there are various talks about redrawing the parliamentary constituencies based upon the value of a vote. Now, value of a vote, that is still being in discussion, basically means, let's suppose if in a state you have 100 people, right? And the state has got some amount of value in terms of the national representation. Then, when it comes to individual voters, what is their value? So, the individual voters, so let's suppose the total amount of value of the state is X. And there are 100 voters out there. So, value of one vote is going to be X by 100, right? Number of seats you can accommodate accordingly. Now, if the population increases furthermore, the value of one vote should decline, keeping the states fixed. Now, this is a kind of a computational analysis which, if adopted, will not let alter any number of seats that, let's suppose, Tamil Nadu has, let's suppose Uttar Pradesh has. So the seats overall will be increased in Lok Sabha to 800, but then each one of them will get their fair representation, as is the case in the parliamentary representation today. So these are still areas of conversation, areas of development. Unless and until central government comes up with a guideline, if at all, till that point of time, reaching a conclusion about what can be the possible measure of delimitation, that is still very theoretical and a scientific discussion at best. But nonetheless, this is a point of concern. Then there is also a concern regarding caste census. Caste census being carried out obviously will have its own political connotations. For the first time since independence, all the castes will be counted in census 2027, unlike the past census, which only recorded SC/ST population. Now, the good point of it is, it will help you streamline and understand your policies, affirmative action policies that we have had in our governance methodologies for few decades now. Now, how efficacious they are or whether they are completely ineffective. So, one, you will get to understand that, but at the same time, it will open a Pandora's box where certain groups, even though there is affirmative action planned for them and is given to them, they are numerologically much larger and they are more prosperous. As a consequence, those groups will not cede any advantages, but the groups which are numerically lesser, they will then seek a recalibration of the entire aspect of how you divide the national income and overall the affirmative action. Now, this again is dangerous because you see, once you start going down this line, the article argues that it can also open the door for the discussion that why don't you go for a religion based census publication as well? Now, there you can have certain minorities with high fertility rate and certain minorities like Parsis, Jains, etc., with a very low fertility rate. So, accordingly, each one will seek their own share of the pie and each one will have a certain demand. Now, you cannot ignore that demand based on the fact that you have ignored or you have agreed to the demand of the caste. So, again, the article argues that when you start carrying out caste census and when you start publishing the details, that can always unravel the various divides that the society doesn't want it to be seen. So these are certain aspects of the census which will make 2027 census a truly centennial event. Now, having said that, we move on into the next article, empowering women in agriculture for food security. Now, this is an article which is very important for your examination. It provides you with a case study as well. And almost every other alternate year, you have a question about women in agriculture, their role, or in general, the upliftment of women in the society. So, this stemmed from the same background and from the same backdrop, relevant for your GS paper 3. Now, this article is about a discussion based upon a symposium on women in agriculture, which was co hosted by the Royal Norwegian Embassy and the UN World Food Programme in India. They hosted a symposium where there was discussion about the Enact program in Assam and also what are the challenges that women in Indian agriculture face and what can be the possible solution as per this Enact program. So this Enact program which is being implemented by World Food Program in Assam, that is something that you can note down as a case study to be used in mains answer writing as well. So here, first of all, when we talk about the context of the article, now United Nations General Assembly has designated 2026 as the International Year of the Women Farmer, with support from over 100 co-sponsors. Now, resolution acknowledges women's vital role in global agriculture and calls attention to challenges such as land ownership rights, market access to the women, etc. across the globe. When we talk about farming, farming in various different areas are intensive subsistence farming, where deployment of family labor is done. It is observed. Every parcel of the land is used. Now, intensive subsistence type of agriculture that you see, that requires the deployment of as much labor and in general family labor. So in family labor, women are deployed in many of the cases. Women majorly are deployed in tending to the crops and taking a look at the conditions of the crops. So, despite forming a very important part of the workforce, they are oftentimes ignored as stakeholders in agricultural development. Various areas have indicated. For example, the region of Nagaon in Assam, where if provided with technological inputs, if provided with timely alerts, and if provided with better variety of seeds, they can bring wonders in agricultural growth. And once women are able to bring growth in agriculture, that provides them with the much required prosperity, ability to earn income, have land ownership, and more important part in the entire paradigm of women empowerment, that lacking of confidence. So this provides them with the confidence to actually dictate their own. So that is very vital in order to achieve the long standing goal of women empowerment, because all of us agree that when we talk about various sectors of economy, majority of the women in the rural areas, especially when we consider rural India, they are deployed in the agricultural sector. Right. So here, what are the challenges that are faced by women in the agricultural sector? Now, they contribute 60 to 80% of the food production in developing countries, but face inequalities, various kind of inequality. Now, when we talk about inequalities, they don't have access to land. Property rights are still not fully and completely granted to them. So, access of rights is denied. Secondly, you will find that even after working, for example, in agriculture, you do need or there is importance of timely weather alerts, right? Isn't it? The conditions of newer seeds available. Now, all those digital and tech role, that is something which is given on a mobile phone in nowadays. Now, they don't have access to mobile phones in most of the cases. When it comes to climate change has got an overbearing impact on women and vulnerable as compared to the men. How, you might ask? For example, when we talk about, let's suppose, the issue of scarcity of water. Now, due to climate change, various areas face scarcity of water. Now, the women being the prime caregivers of the family, they oftentimes have to traverse long distances to bring water. Now, due to climate change, as the availability of water declines, means women oftentimes have to travel farther, as a consequence, declining their overall output and leading to a decline in the productivity and also the health. So they are impacted at an unequal level, at a disproportionate level due to climate change. Also, because you don't have land ownership, you don't get credit. When you go to microfinance institutions, when you go to banks, you don't get credit because the land is not in your name. So, invariably, you have to go to the money lenders in most of the cases. And again, that puts you in the jaw of that debt trap, which oftentimes sadly leads into the case of farm suicides. So, these are some of the challenges which are faced. Now, role of technology is very vital and very important, which cannot be ignored in agriculture anymore. Even historically, for that matter, even if you go thousands of years ago, in agriculture, wherever we have seen the phases of agricultural development, technology has got an important role to play. Be it the aqueducts that you found in the the Byzantine Empire, and still in the present day region of Italy, Turkey, etc. Those aqueducts, that was a thing of technological use. Irrigation, technological use. In the region of Delhi Sultanate, development of canals, technological use. So whenever use of technology has been done in agriculture, there has been a substantial return and income. Post independence, we saw green revolution, which involved utilization of technology being implemented in the northwestern part of the country, and northwestern part of the country gained prosperity based upon that implementation of technology. So, even in today's day and age, when the climate is finicky and changes every few hours, the dry and the heat waves continue for a long period of time. Excess rainfall brings about flooding, etc. Climate advisories, weather forecasting, and mobile based alerts are very important. Partnership with agriculture universities and local departments promote climate resilient crop varieties. So, better variety of seeds as well. Then, collaborative models bridge technical support and behavioral change, right? So, that is where you need that technological intervention. Now, the Enact program that I was talking about. What is this Enact program, which is being implemented in Assam on the with the help of the World Food Program? So, Enact stands for Enhancing Climate Adaptation of Vulnerable Communities through Nature-Based Solutions and Gender Transformative Approaches. Basically, climate smart and also gender sensitive to improve agricultural outcome. That is the Enact program. Now, this Enact program, implemented by World Food Program and the Assam government, supports small landholder women farmers in accessing climate related information and decision making tools. To improve, the goal is to improve resilience, promote self sufficiency, and reinforce women's rights in food systems. That is the Enact program. Now, there have been some success stories being woven out of these Enact program, which can be a kind of a telltale story which can be followed in rest of the country as well. Because agriculture in rest of the country is not very different as compared to the agriculture in Assam. So it addresses through solutions like flood resistant rice and local crop diversification. You see, they have basically brought about a variety of rice which can grow even in submerged and uh, completely immersed conditions. Generally, when you plant the saplings of rice and then there is an overwhelming flood, the rice crop simply goes to waste, isn't it? So, this kind of new development of technology to come up with new varieties of rice. Now, the farmers in Assam, they are pretty confident that this year they will have a better produce owing to the fact that they have the flood resistant rice, which they are growing. It fosters peer learning models, connecting women via weekly village meetings and phone based updates, as is being done in Nagaon in Assam. Women groups engage in community smart production systems and collective voice in decision making. Community based high tech initiatives like in Nagaon, Assam show how targeted support means what? Simple tech intervention, nature based warning that what the nature is going to be like, how the soil in your region is behaving. This simple support system that also is lacking. Now, meanwhile, the government of India has also framed various different policies and schemes in order to enable the farmers, that is, the women farmers. So, Mahila Kisan Shashaktikaran Pariyojana, that is for skill building, access to the markets, and promote sustainable agriculture. The submission on agricultural mechanization provides 50 to 80% subsidies to women. 30% of the National Food Security Mission's budget is also allocated to women. But the thing and the problem with all these schemes is this targets that population where the woman already is empowered enough to reach the doorsteps of the government to ask or the to get the approval of subsidy. We still are very far away from that reality in many parts of the country. That is where we need a greater role of the civil society organizations. We need a greater role, and there is a greater role to be played by the self help groups, where the women they form those voluntary self help groups and they come ahead with changing the paradigm of agriculture in their own region. Now, when women find their voice, not only does the economic paradigm of the region change, but also the social fabric of the region becomes much stronger. So, that is where women's role in agriculture can morph into multiple fruitful implications for the society. That is something that you have to use in your answer and also the way forward. Okay, let's take a look at the question. Analyze the challenges faced by women in agriculture in India. Discuss the remedial steps needed. A straightforward, simple question, right? Now, how do you write the intro in this? What do you write in the intro? Do you straight away start writing that women in India face certain challenges in agricultural system like lack of land ownership, etc.? You don't start your answer by that. You basically start your answer by saying that when we talk about women or women overall are responsible for 60 to 80% of the food production in developing parts of the world, including India. Despite this major contribution, They face challenges and setbacks at each and every stage of their agricultural productivity. That will be your introduction. After that, when you start the body, that is basically when you have to start talking about the challenges that women they face certain challenges. So first of all, importance or role, right? So what is importance? Contribution. The number, if you are able to mention, immediately it will substantiate your answer, authenticate your answer. Then in the body, because in the last part of introduction you had mentioned they face certain challenges. So the body should start with challenges so that there is a continuity as well. So once you start by talking about challenges, then in the point subparagraph manner explain and elaborate the challenges. Impact of climate change needs to be highlighted. Don't ignore the impact of climate change. It is going to become very vital in the coming years and days. Then also impact lack of credit, lack of land holding, all those factors you analyze. Then the remedial step. In the remedial steps, you talk about the steps needed. Now, how do you start talking about the steps needed? You write a filler sentence that these challenges can be overcome if certain steps can be taken. Community based systems, then role of tech, greater lending by microfinance institutions, then providing recognition to the self help groups. All of this you mention. Then eventually you also substantiate because it is a 15 marker question. You also write about the Government of India scheme even though it is not asked. But if you write that the government of India has also stepped up to provide contribution or to help the women farmers or women in agriculture with the help of these schemes, underline those schemes, your answer will be much more beautiful. And the conclusion that we just talked about, that will be your entire answer. Okay? Now, the next article. How drones are the new face of war. Now, drone tech has been out there around us for some time now. It is not something which is very, very new. But then, drone tech in the warfare, that is something which has been there for the previous 2 to 3 years and has been changing very rapidly. Earlier, when you had the US invasion of Afghanistan, that is when the world woke up to the reality that there could be certain drones which could carry armaments and bombard the regions of Afghanistan without any human losses on the US side. A person sitting behind the joystick way back in US could control a predator drone and that could cause all the destruction. That is something that the world was coming to grasp with. But simultaneously, various different countries like China, Israel, Turkey, Iran, India, to some extent, we started developing drones. Now, in the modern era, drone warfare started coming of age in the Armenia Azerbaijan conflict. Now, the Armenia Azerbaijan conflict was very interesting, not in the sense of the outcome on the ground, but in the sense of the warfare techniques which were used. And this is where, for the first time, now you would all have heard about the Bayraktar drones that Pakistan deployed, which were of Turkish origin during the case of Operation Sindoor. It was in this Armenia Azerbaijan conflict where the Bayraktar drones were deployed to great efficacy. Before this model was not used. Now, both Armenia and Azerbaijan, for those of us who are uninitiated, were arguing and having a dispute and having a war around the disputed region of Nagorno Karabakh. Nagorno Karabakh. That was the disputed region which was in news, which was also asked in the prelims. Now, there was a kind of a stalemate between both the sides. Both the sides were in a defensive position. Anybody who went to attack would experience certain setbacks and would then retreat. But Azerbaijan deployed something very interesting. Now, Azerbaijan flooded the Armenian air defense with drones, low value drones. The Armenian air defense was simply overwhelmed by it because the radar system that start detecting hundreds of these flying objects, how many will you shoot down? Now, after a point of time, when you see that, okay, these are low value drones, what is the maximum impact that they will have? So let's unload the kind of radar mechanisms and the air defense mechanisms that we have. Now, once Armenia lowered its guard, then within the next few hours, Azerbaijan, within those foreign drone attacks, unleashed its Air Force fighters. And the Air Force fighters virtually went undetected. Not only could they carry out the SIAD operation, that is suppression of enemy air defense, but they also went a step further and they could carry out a complete, what is also known as DIAD, or also pronounced as dead. That is the destruction of enemy air. So this was done and deployed carefully between or in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. The world was taking note of this. Now, when the Ukraine-Russia war broke out and Russian invasion happened, now obviously Russia had much greater military might as compared to what Ukraine could ever conjure. Now Russia had that enviable S-400 protection system whereby any of the flying objects could be shot down as far away as 400 kilometers as well. Now, what Ukraine started doing, obviously, it got its entire air force fleet depleted very quickly and in very early stages of the combat itself. So, what Ukraine started deploying is started using these low value drones packed with. Now, many of them would be the simple quadcopters that you can buy from your nearest Hamleys or your nearest toy store. So those drones, which would be hardly of a few dollars, they would be packed with explosives and they would be flown to Russia. Now, Russia would activate its air defense, and you would have a missile launched from a S-400 or S-300 system. They would attack those drones. But then an individual missile of S-400 would cost millions of dollars, whereas this drone could be readily bought from the market for a few dollars. Like that, Ukraine started creating a kind of a financial havoc in Russian defense military industrial complex. And that provided them with a kind of an edge. Now, recently, what Ukraine conducted, Operation Spider, whereby Ukraine indicated to the world that simple low cost and low tech drones could end up devastating and causing destruction to Russia's long range bomber fleet. The Tupolev aircraft. Many of them were destroyed. They are amongst the best in the world when it comes to long range bombers. Long range bombers basically are those kind of planes where they can move to a long range at a greater altitude, so they are away from the enemy radars because of that great height. And at one point of time, they can dump the ammunition over a region, completely annihilating that region. The Tupolev aircrafts, or Tu aircrafts as they are known as, they basically are the fleet which was destroyed. Overall, the number of drones which carried out this suicide mission, they were a few in number. But the destruction on the side of the Russians, that is estimated to be close to around 30 to 40 billion dollars. So obviously, drone warfare has created a scenario of asymmetry. And that is what the article is arguing. That entire world is developing the drone warfare. India also needs to keep pace. Now, we in India have to take pride in the fact that Indian armed forces not only held their own in the recently conducted Operation Sindoor, but they showed their intent that they are looking at the conflict across the world and they are improving. One of the and major impacts and attacks that drones carried out in India or in Pakistan, in the case of Operation Sindoor, you would have observed even the videos which were shown in Operation Sindoor, that also indicated that there were drones in the air. At the same time, the drones basically filmed the ammunition going and destroying the headquarters of LET in Muridke, in Bahawalpur, etc. So that indicates the coming of age of Indian drone systems as well. For the first time, India managed to deploy loitering munitions. Now, these loitering munitions, now this is basically those kind of drones which will hover around a region, and then these are suicide drones. They are kamikaze drones, also known as kamikaze drones. So basically, Eventually, they will go and attack the target and they will destroy themselves, creating a large explosion. So, loitering munitions were deployed. Then, high altitude observation drones were deployed. So, all of them were deployed by India. Pakistan, on the other hand, followed a simple copybook texture of what was the Armenian approach in the Nagorno Karabakh conflict. That was absolutely replicated from the side of Pakistan. This is again where the Indian armed forces had already practiced this. Now, information is coming out that Pakistan had carried out this drone simulation almost a couple of years back, which provided a kind of a head start for Indians to work in its defense. And what we managed to do, we managed to provide a complete integration of all our defense forces, be it the very decades old, our very a kind of legacy system which is no longer in much use in the armed forces, the L-70 guns, decades old, the Shilka systems that we have, the Shilkas. Again, there have been conversations whether they will be used in the modern warfare anytime again or not. They were about to be decommissioned. And when you talk about the Zu 23 mortars, right, or even the S-400s, all of them were integrated to provide an integrated air defense. And that air defense meant that, including the snipers on the ground, each of them could target the different type of drone. So that is where we have developed a kind of a defensive posture. But the problems are still there. There are still challenges. Challenges in the sense that when it comes to drone supremacy, it is not only about numbers, it is also about technology. Because nowadays, drones, as we have seen in the Pakistan attack as well, when Pakistan launched its drone attack, many of these drones, they were AI programmed and they automatically would move towards their target unless and until shot down. In the case of Ukraine Russia conflict as well, we had seen that many of the terrain which are difficult to maneuver, now they were pre-fed as a data system and a data link into the drone. So technology is also changing. Few of the drones, they have the electronic counterfeit kind of equipment whereby they can provide some amount of cyber spoofing. So even if your radars are trying to detect them, these drones will simply end up blocking their signals and move somewhere else. So technology is changing. We have managed to gain that upper hand this time, but that means a continued development is required. Recently, that is yesterday, there was news about Indian defense and the defense ministry talking about acquisition of greater 23 mortars and these systems into the armed forces. So not only technology, but also quantity, because these are expendable. You can have hundreds of them flooding and saturating your air defense systems. And then, once your air defense systems are suppressed, what is the SIAD operation, suppression of enemy air defense? Then, after that, you can devastate. So, then an arsenal of different varieties of drones are also required rather than fixating on only one kind of predator drones or so on. Then potential of mass production should be there. Because in a long drawn conflict, chances are that hundreds of your drones will get destroyed maybe in one night. But then your ability to deploy them again the next day will make all the difference. That is what makes the difference in a long drawn war. War gaming new strategy to kill in the light of electronic counter warfare suites, in the light of cyber tech, in the light of AI, you do need new strategies and develop suitable munitions, not only for the destruction of drones, but also for the drones to be deployed. That is where we also have our own indigenous drone program. It is moving at a particularly slow rate, but that is the case with almost all our defense equipments. Now, in our own indigenous drone program, you have two of them. One is Rustam, where the development is happening at a slightly faster pace. And the second is the Ghatak. Ghatak is a slightly larger one and has got a slight stealthy nature associated. So these are two of our drone programs. But the advent of the private organization and private companies in the drone manufacturing, that is something which needs to be appreciated and which needs to be further encouraged. You have new space technologies, etc., which have come in and brought their own set of loitering munitions and swarm drones. And that is something which has helped immensely, even in the deployment in this time's Operation Sindoor. The Adanis have come up with their a kind of a copy of the Heron drone as well. Even mind you, even the Azerbaijan conflict, there also the Israeli Harop drones were used. India also used and deployed Harop drones when it comes to Pakistan. So we need to develop these cutting edge technology in order to stay ahead of the curve. So let's take a look at the practice question. Discuss the changes brought into modern warfare with the advent of drone technology and mention the ways in which India can fight the emerging challenge. 10 mark a question. So, how do you address the intro? Just work on the intro and the flow, answer writing will come automatically. So, what do you address when you are talking about the intro? Challenges brought into the modern warfare. So, you can talk about the fact that warfare is a dynamic concept whose values and attributes have been changing since the advent of history or through the pages of history. That is where now it has transitioned to a system or an environment dominated by AI and dominated by drone. That will be your introduction. After that, in the flow, talk about how this has brought about a new paradigm whereby the traditional missile or the proximal warfare, which existed, that the enemy forces have to come head on head. So that has been debunked. So talk about those, talk about the kind of conventional ammunitions, they are out of order. So these are some of the challenges: low cost, large destruction, right? So that is the challenges that you mentioned, and what are the steps which a country like India can take that we have enumerated, that you can also. Okay. Now, after this, one of the articles where I just want you to know the timeline so that you can follow this developing story over a period of time. And this is something, as I always say, once Trump is in power, then all the happenings and all the eyeballs gets glued to the US. So basically, Donald Trump is being threatened to be sued by the governor of California over the illegal and immoral deployment of National Guards in California. Now, very brief understanding. Please understand that when it comes to US, now US again represents the federal characteristic as stringently as possible. Now, California, being a Democrat state, now is ruled by a Democrat governor. And Trump, being a Republican, has never looked at the California or the region of California in kind eyes or in a kind of a grateful eyes. It has always taken a look at the governor and California in a detrimental view. Now, Trump has got one major agenda, which he feels is the ultimate solution to all the problems of the world, and that is the problem of immigrant. Illegal immigrant. Now, when we talk about California, situated in the southern part of the country, of US, southwestern part of the country, shares its border with the regions where you have a lot of Mexicans, people from El Salvador, people from the region of the Central Americas. They come and they are the migrants, many of them legal, few of them illegal. Now, what Trump did, it the Trump basically, or the federal administration, that deployed ICE, or immigration and customs enforcement. These are the guards, armed police, so to say, also regarded as ICE. Now, to give you a timeline of events, now these individuals or ICE, they went to an apparel store, a kind of an apparel manufacturing store, where they felt that there would be a lot of illegal immigrants. There, they detained few of the people, close to around 100 as the number goes. This entire event started on 6th of June. 6th of June was when this event started. Now, they were taken to a detention center nearby. Now, people and public in the nearby region obviously were enraged by this. Not only did they started filming the entire aspect of detention, but they held protest. Now, protest in US is very different from protest in India. When we talk about a protest in India, we are easily talking about 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 people out there. In US, you had close to around 100, 150 people holding the protest. Now, that was seen as a threat to security. Now, thereby, the California Home Guards, along with ICE officials, they started deploying tear gas, rubber bullets, and stun grenades. So, mind you, rubber bullets can cause large amount of damage. At the same time, stun grenades can cause permanent hearing loss, concussions, etc. So that was deployed. Now, owing to that, obviously the situation turned to worse. The mob went out of control. Now, one of the prime targets for the mob was actually, and very hilariously so, self driving cars. So self-driving cars were basically ransacked. They were burnt. Various different shops, etc., were ransacked and burnt, and the region of California literally on fire. Now, as a consequence to this, rather than allowing the local authorities to bring the matter into their control, what Trump did was something surprising. Trump invoked an old 1870 act and brought in the National Guards into California. Now, National Guards, to help you understand better, they are like the paramilitary forces, National Guard, so to say, but they are the reserved force. It is the citizens who are deployed when required for national service. So, National Guards typically would be deployed when there is an outbreak of a natural disaster like Hurricane Katrina, which had caused a lot of devastation, or even when a war broke out, the Afghan war, there also in certain areas, National Guards were deployed. National Guards are deployed in very rare scenarios. But Trump, being Trump, deployed the National Guards in California. And that was on 8th of June. And that unleashed all the paradigm of information, misinformation campaign. All the meanwhile, Trump, again being Trump, continued to put out tweets on Truth Social talking about how the governor of California himself was responsible for all the mayhem. And in one of the later orders that he gave, he said that all the people wearing masks, they are the dubious ones and they should be arrested if not shot. So that is the condition which is actually unraveling in the region of US and in the state of California, which is a prosperous $1 trillion state. So you can imagine the impact not only on the economy of the region, but at the same time, the local law and order. So that is the case of what is happening in US. Again, follow this along with the Manipur story. It is developing. Now, having said that, that is the chronology of the events from 6th to 8th of June. That is something we have taken a look at. Now we take a look at certain articles relevant for your prelims. A new water harvesting model promises to help Rajasthan's farmers. Now, Rajasthan, the region of Rajasthan typically is known for lesser amount of rainfall and lot of rain which does occur that is very periodic in nature and it runs off. Not only does it create soil erosion, but at the same time, this renders the amount of moisture availability to be very insufficient, and the farmers they are forced to grow certain crops limited to like bajra, millets, etc. Now, what has been done is, as you can see in the image, construction of large farm ponds have been done, starting with the Kukas village in Jaipur. Now, as a consequence of that, it is supposed to bring about water sufficiency, groundwater recharge in the region of Rajasthan. And that brings about the perspective and the possibility of crop diversification in a region which has not experienced it for a long period of time. So it can herald in a new era of agricultural development in these areas where it is being implemented. This can also be used by you as a case study for water conservation in an essay paper or even in GS paper 3 if required. Now, coming on to the next article. India's first e-waste recycling park to be built in Delhi. Now, it will be built on design, operate, build, design, build, finance, operate, and transfer in a public private partnership model. But that is the case of the e-waste recycling park. Now, UPSC does not ask you in general where the first recycling park is set, but in case of multi-statement question, you should be aware it is being set up in Delhi. Now, when we talk about e-waste, what is more important for you to understand is the fact that various different reports over the past year and a half have indicated that India has become the third largest source of e-waste in the world. Third largest source of e-waste. But more importantly and dangerously so, the rate of generation of e-waste is fastest. The rate of growth of generation of e-waste is the fastest in India. So India sees fastest growth of e-waste generation, where the e-waste growth has basically been a stupendous 168% in India. So you can see that when it comes to the volume in terms of metric tons, it is not the highest out there. The highest obviously is China. Then after that follows US. As a region, EU comes in, but EU is composed of many countries. So the third most e-waste generating country in the world, India. Fastest rate of growth of e-waste in the world, this is two things that you can keep in mind. Now, it was highlighted by United Nations Conference of on Trade and Development, UNCTAD. And that is where in its 2024 digital report that it had financed and it had brought into existence, that is where it had highlighted these facts. Okay, this is relevant for your prelim. Then, the story of how Asafoetida came to be successfully cultivated in Asafoetida, or what is in common parlance also referred to as hing, that forms an important part of our diet and has formed an important part of our diet for a long period of time, going back centuries. Now, this Asafoetida is said to have certain antibiotic properties and certain other beneficial properties for our immune system and also for the wellness of our body. So it is nutritious, considered to be nutritious as well. But then it is not typically and it was never typically grown in India. So the region of the world where it was grown in would be the regions of Afghanistan and Iran. These are the areas where typically Asafoetida would be grown. So, what are the conditions required for the growth of Asafoetida? So, basically, it thrives in arid and semi arid regions with well drained soil, full sun, and a cool, dry climate. It prefers sandy or rocky soil, right? Sandy, not very moist. And look at the temperature tolerance up till -4, till around 30 or at max 35. So, again, tells you colder conditions, less rainfall, Asafoetida growth. Annual rainfall should be minimal, likely around 2. Not now. The challenge basically was to start growing it in India. The government also brought about directives, and there have been various different since that point of time. We have managed to have or gain successful germination of this Asafoetida seeds in the region of Himachal Pradesh. Now, what has when we talk about asafoetida, so it is grown as a crop. Now, near the roots, there is a cut which is made. From that cut, resin-like substance comes out. Right? Resin-like substance comes out from the region of the root. Now, that resin-like substance is then extracted, dried, powdered, crystallized, and sold as asafoetida. But gaining their germination was very difficult and has been very difficult because the germination rate is low. Having said that, in the regions of Lahaul and Spiti, Mandi, Kinnaur, Kulu, and Chamba, in the villages that are mentioned, that is where the implementation has happened. And to also, along with that, have the institutionalization of the entire germination process and the good practices by development of King Germoplasm Resource Center, which was established in Palampur. So what it has done, this center, it has made the entire process institutional, where all the data, information, good practices about what can lead to germination. Because mind you, in our country, even the farmers don't have the traditional background of growing hing. So they don't know under which conditions they will thrive, under which conditions they won't, which varieties of seeds will germinate and which varieties won't. So that is why there was a requirement of this resource germoplasm center, which has been established where? In Palampur. That is again relevant for your prelims. Conditions required, regions of the world where they are grown, and in India, where is the institution supporting all of that? Yes, good for digestive health. Now, how extracting and producing nickel can be made more sustainable? Now, this is an article talking about that nickel production and purification process is a carbon intensive industry. It ends up emitting a lot of carbon emissions. So, getting you directly to the gist of it, what will be relevant for your prelims? When we talk about the nickel extraction, many of the times the ores that you find, the ores have other minerals like cobalt, copper, etc., embedded within it. So, in the purification process, first of all, what is done? You have the leaching, right? After that, the extraction. Now, there a solution is attained. After that, you basically have the extraction where there is electrowinning, right? Reduction plant, and then nickel chemical plant where nickel salts and cobalt sulfate they are extracted. But in the reduction plant, what is that reduction? What is the process of reduction? In chemistry, reduction is a process which is directly opposite to oxidation. So when you have oxides of an element, so thereby you react it or you carry out the reaction with carbon. And that is where carbon reacts with the oxygen and forms carbon dioxide, and that is emitted. Whereas the oxygen has been removed from that ore, so you have the pure metal. So nickel briquettes are derived from it, and CO2 emission is observed. That CO2 is or is a greenhouse gas, leads to a higher level of warmth. So newer technology basically have talked about utilization of hydrogen rather than carbon. With the help of the electric arc welding mechanism, hydrogen is combined or is made to react with the nickel oxides at higher temperature. As a consequence of that, hydrogen will combine with oxygen to produce vapor. Again, eco-friendly. So here you will observe, rather, here you will observe that basically hydrogen is creating an eco-friendly outcome. At the same time, the level of greenhouse gases are reduced. But then taking this opportunity to also talk about uh, the metal that is nickel. So which is the largest producer of nickel in the world? It is Indonesia. Around 50% of the mine production of nickel came from Indonesia. Then you had Russia, you had Philippines, obviously 10%, New Caledonia, Australia, Canada, China, Brazil, and so. Indonesia and Philippines being the largest. Then after that, cobalt. When we talk about cobalt, DRC is the largest production. Almost 73.3% of the production is in DRC, followed by Indonesia. Both nickel and cobalt are of very vital use when it comes to electric vehicles and the deployment of green tech. That is why we needed to have a kind of a non-carbon intensive method of extraction of nickel. Because think about it, in the name of deploying green tech, we were basically what we were doing is that we were emitting carbon to extract nickel so that it can be used in electric vehicles. But why are you using electric vehicles? To reduce the emission of carbon dioxide. But in the process, you are also emitting carbon dioxide. So that is why it did not make sense. Now, with this modern technology which is being talked about, that is where you can use this eco friendly method of utilizing hydrogen in order to produce nickel and thereby completely get rid of the carbon emission. Now, after that, coming on to the last article. Last article, government eases SEZ, special economic zone norms for chip and electric units. So the SEZ norms generally now it has gone through multiple changes over a period of time. You would have studied that in your economy basics. Now, the SEZ or the special economic zones, they house companies which are typically there for export purposes, right? Now, these companies need to have an export market in order to sustain themselves economically and make themselves viable. Now, when it comes to chip and electronic industry, chip makers and electronic industry, now there they are coming of age in India, particularly in the chip manufacturing. We have to have a substantial catching up to do before we come up to the level of the global peers and the global competition. That is why the norms have been changed to make it economically viable for these companies to operate in the SEZ. So thereby, the size of the land holding requirement, which was there, that as a company you need to have at least this much size of land holding to operate an industry, that has been reduced. So land holding parameter, that has been reduced. Also, a norm has been made whereby these companies are now allowed to sell to the domestic market after paying the applicable duties. So sell to domestic market. Okay, after obviously paying the applicable duty. So these are some of the changes which have been made in order to make them much more economically viable, in order to allow them growth in this nascent stage where they require handholding. So that brings us to the end of the discussion for the day. I hope the discussion was valuable qualitatively and you have gained some amount of information from various different articles. Try to write the answer, or at least try to frame the flow and the introduction on your own and start answer writing as early as possible. If you have liked the content, please put that in the comment section, and don't forget to click on the like, share, and the subscribe button. Till we meet again, take care. Goodbye. Thank you.